And you can just quickly advance through the slides to your beginning presentation slide. I've just posted the live captioning link, and at this point in time, I would like to hand it over to our presenters for today, Richard Garrett and Ron Legon, the co-directors of the Chloe Project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. This is Richard Garrett. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Eduventures, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Chloe Project from its inception back in 2016. Ron?
Hi, this is Ron Legon, the other co-director from the beginning, and happy to be with you here this afternoon.
So our intention today is to, yes, talk about the Chloe 4 findings, but also to acknowledge that we're in a very different environment today than when those findings were collected, when that survey was done back in 2019. So we want to try and connect as far as possible the lessons from Chloe 4 for today's situation. So we tried to organize the slides, the excerpts from the report, our commentary to try and make that connection. And we encourage you to share your feedback, your experiences, your situation, your questions. And the goal is to try and make Chloe 4 speak to today. So we're going to start with some introductory comments, just a reminder about what Chloe is, where it's come from, that this is the 4th Chloe survey, and then we'll get into some specifics and try and tie it to today's situation. So this is the 4th Chloe survey. It's an annual exercise, and we're very pleased that our sample, our institutional sample, has grown significantly over time. In the first year, we got just over 100 responses, then it went up to about 180, and then you can see Chloe 3, 280, Chloe 4, 367, and a nice mix of institutional types. And you can see the growth rate there year over year between Chloe 3 and Chloe 4. As a reminder, this is a survey of chief online officers, the catch-all term we use to describe the leader of online learning at institutions. Those people go by many names. It's an evolving, dynamic situation now and certainly in the past, but someone increasingly is in charge of online learning as part of a collective environment of decision making, and the importance of online is becoming ever greater. Now, we intend to run the survey again this year, and we'll have some comments later on about how we're going to frame Chloe given the unprecedented events and the fact that online learning has been thrust center stage in a way that it never has been before. So let's go to the next slide. Our sample is also diverse by scale of online enrollment. And here we're combining students who do everything online and also students who take one or more online courses as part of an otherwise traditional campus-based program. But you can see we have a lot of schools that have relatively few online students, under 1,000. We have those that are mid-sized, up to 7,500, and then we have those that are large and some very large, more than 10,000, more than 20,000, and so on. So our thinking is that this is representative of the variety of online higher education in US higher education today. Next slide. Ron,
I think I'll take over from this point, Richard. Okay. We look at various ways to divide our sample and provide insight that's useful to different types of institutions. And one of them is this multi-factor institutional model, and I'll be referring to some of these types of institutions as we go through the data. We start with the largest institutions. Richard just made a reference to them, with over 7,500 fully and partly online students, and we consider these enterprise institutions where policy and budgets and so on are being driven by online enrollment, although there may be other large groups as well. We also include on the right-hand column regional public institutions that are between 1,000 and 7,500 online students, regional private institutions, low enrollment institutions, 4-year low enrollment that have under 1,000 fully and partly online students, and community colleges, 2-year public institutions with fewer than 7,500. The enterprise group includes both 2- and 4-year public and private, unlike these other categories, because we feel there's some commonality in the issues faced by very large programs. A new group that we now have enough participation to include when we do this type of analysis are flagship universities that may have a research and public service mission that drives their approach to online learning. 20 of the 60-some flagship institutions in the US are now in our sample, and we felt this was a large enough representation to look at how they are dealing with various issues as well. As Richard mentioned, we are trying to be sensitive to the unique situation we're in at the present moment, where the great majority of institutions have either terminated their spring terms or more likely transitioned into an online mode to complete the current term, and are facing the prospect of needing to upgrade their online approach for their entire curriculum this summer, and for some possibly into the fall, depending on the spread of the pandemic and when it is judged safe to resume something close to normal activity. For its history of surveys, CLOE has typically focused on the practices of online learning as it grows and becomes a mainstream activity in many institutions. We've looked at what it's accomplished and how it is influencing their institutions. But I would have to say that our view is of online learning primarily, and ignoring or leaving aside the substantial face-to-face component of learning that continues at most institutions, although there are some that have become fully online. But CLOE has not explored in any depth the impact or the consequences of extending online learning to the entire student body at the majority of institutions. And so we have not really assessed the position of non-participating faculty, people who have not taught fully online courses, and there are probably a majority in that category, and the student body, which still remains majority face-to-face. So in this webinar, we're going to attempt to look at the empty half of the glass and ask the basic question: how ready is online learning to assume responsibility for all learning at these institutions, either temporarily or permanently, or as a backup always available in the event of problems. So what does CLOE 4 tell us, and to some extent the earlier CLOE surveys on this question? We can quickly dispose of this graph, which tells us that almost all the institutions that we are surveying, that respond to our survey, have someone they would regard as a chief online officer under a variety of titles. That figure in the latest survey has reached almost 100%. And you can see the general growth pattern here, which has accelerated in the last 10 years and may now be starting to level off, since most institutions have addressed this need. Each year we try to determine what the role of the chief online officer is, and we try to refine that over time. In the latest survey, we attempted to distinguish between core responsibilities of the chief online officer and co-responsibilities. So in other words, those in which the chief online officer has the primary responsibility, and those in which that officer shares responsibility, negotiates with other power centers and resource centers in the institution. You can see from this slide that many of the issues listed, and I've highlighted them in red, would have a direct bearing on how to respond to the current pandemic crisis. And you can read those for yourself, but it's obvious that at least those highlighted items would need to be addressed if there is any attempt to rapidly move courses online, either in a convenient communication format or ultimately with the full resources and full capabilities of online education. And so I would imagine, although we have not surveyed as yet to determine what has actually happened, I would imagine that in most, if not all, of the institutions that we survey, and they extrapolating then to the larger higher education market, that in most of them, the first call, or certainly one of the first calls from the president's office to deal with this crisis, was to the chief online officer. And those people have been pretty busy, I would think, for the last 4 to 6 weeks. And there doesn't seem to be any immediate let up from that. Which leads to one of the observations of the survey, which is probably by now out of date. We asked about whether chief online officers were growing in influence at their institutions. And we learned that over 60% believe that their influence and role has been increasing. And most of the rest believe that it has plateaued or stabilized. And that includes some of the categories of institutions that have been invested in online learning the longest. So for example, in the enterprise group, all of the responding institutions say that the role is stable. And we take that to mean that they have achieved their full stature and influence at the institution up before this time. But 61% said it is, their role is increasing and their visibility is increasing. And if we ask how the pandemic and the response to it might affect that, clearly it can only accelerate and add impetus to the growth of this position. In terms of some of the functions of online learning that we can look at repeatedly, we'll take a look at how some of them are affected or could be affected by the current emergency. One area we surveyed was the prevalence of formal or required online student orientation. We all know that online is a challenge to many types of students, and that they need to learn how to manage their time, their assignments, and how to communicate more fully online in contrast to the classroom. What we learned was a bit of a surprise. Only 30% of the responding institutions require that students take an online orientation before they take online courses, or even concurrently with their first online course. And that's an average. If you look at the detail here, it's only 10% of flagship institutions that require this, and 10% more where that requirement is waived on certain conditions. So let's say 20%, and it goes up from there. But even at its greatest, for regional private institutions, only half of them require online student orientation. As I say, this was a bit of a surprise because one would think that this is low-hanging fruit, something that institutions can do that's going to enhance the persistence and success of students making the transition to online learning. And yet we see that is not the case. Perhaps somewhat this is in a result of belief that students are increasingly savvy about online communication, just in the nature of things, but it still was somewhat surprising. When we asked in more detail how else students are prepared, some schools indicated that they had voluntary orientation courses, that students had access to videos that could help them, and that they, in some cases, could visit a technical office and get one-on-one help if they were having problems. But this is a bit of a challenge for those 70% of institutions and preparing students, and that's taking into account that they're only dealing with fully online students for a fraction of their courses. Now they need to be moving all their students online. Are they prepared to do this? Do they have the capability? Do they have the tools? Have they done the work? And obviously there are serious questions about that. We also asked about the preparation of faculty for online teaching. And we discovered somewhat better results here, that 60% of the schools in the survey report that they do require faculty to prepare formally for online teaching. And that still, of course, leaves 40% of institutions that do not require this kind of preparation. And that may be leaving faculty much more on their own with help that they seek out, if any, to prepare themselves. The training they do receive, where it is available, covers the LMS and online technology. That's the green bar. It also covers institutional policies that affect online students and faculty. Quality assurance standards that the institution or the program is required or committed to observing, and then strategies for teaching, resources, and pedagogy, the blue line. And you can see that roughly equivalent amounts of effort are devoted to each of these areas in most of the cases in which formal training of faculty is required. But again, the question that we're asking today has more to do with the 40% of institutions that have not prepared their online faculty and now may be expected to work with faculty who have never taught an online course and perhaps in many cases have no desire or intent to teach online, and how they are going to be made ready and ready to be effective online and not simply going through the motions. One piece of relatively encouraging news was that centers for teaching, learning, and technology, which are variously named, exist at the great majority of institutions. More than 3/4 of institutions have such centers, and many have more than one such center. Often they are reactive in the sense that faculty come to them when they have projects or needs, just the need to help in a general sense. But they are there, they are available, and I would imagine that most of them have been pressed into service in the last 2 months or less to help prepare faculty that are not fully prepared to teach online. Some perhaps with the most basic questions about navigating an LMS, and not in any sense prepared to think about how one restructures a course to be effective online. You can see there are some differences here in the percentages of institutions that do have this resource available to them. And here, the flagship institutions clearly with substantial resources are the most likely to have such centers. But even in community colleges, 70% have one or more of these centers. Another resource that may be available to help in this crisis is online program management partnerships. We discovered that there has been in our data roughly a doubling of institutions reporting that they have such long-term partnership relationships. The question was somewhat broader than in the past, and so the increase may not be quite so dramatic, but it is substantial and gives us about 1/4 of institutions that have such partnerships. They tend to be flagship institutions and regional private institutions which typically have more discretionary resources than most public institutions at the regional level or low enrollment institutions. And before the pandemic, half of them cited as advantages of these arrangements the fact that OPMs can provide rapid scaling of online programs and courses and rapid development of courses and programs. And those would be very valuable assets at this time. On the other hand, though, 3/4 of our surveyed institutions do not have such arrangements, and in most cases seem very skeptical of them. They may also lack the resources, even if they had the desire, but they believe that they can or need to meet their own needs internally, and that the costs and revenue sharing aspects of many OPM arrangements would not work for them. And they prefer short-term and limited contracts. My suspicion here is that they will not be turning to the OPM market in most cases to help them meet the pressures of wholesale conversion of courses and programs online. But time will tell, and as we'll say a little more later, we will be doing some research to find out exactly how institutions have adjusted to these new realities. Finally, in my presentation here, the faculty need to have a role in the growth of online, and we've been looking at how their input is provided and weighted in the process through the existence of councils and committees that are dedicated to online learning. We've been looking at this for several years, and now we're in a position to identify the areas in which they have the greatest influence. They're still only determinative in a small fraction of cases. In most cases, they are making recommendations to other standing committees and administrative leaders, so their role is more advisory. And you can see the details here, and if you look at the recording, you'll be able to read this closely. The red arrows here, though, point to areas that would be vitally important during the response to the coronavirus. They include developing courses and programs, training faculty, developing policies for online students, coordinating among academic units, orienting students, that big gap that I pointed out before, and coordinating the support services that make online programs run. These are all vital issues, and we will be interested to see whether these committees' roles have increased during this emergency because they are prepared to address issues of this kind in detail. In general, though, I would say that they are focused on policy and not implementation. For implementation, they would be turning these recommendations over to the chief online officer, the provost, and other senior officers of the institution. Now I'll turn this over to Richard.
Thank you, Ron. And just before I go through my slides, just a reminder that all the tables and charts that we're sharing with you here and many more besides are in the CLOE 4 report, which was published last month. If you haven't seen it, and it's freely available both on the Quality Matters website and also on the Eduventures website, as well as the prior CLOE reports. So in my section, I wanted to reflect on some other dimensions of the latest CLOE data, specifically looking at questions of online learning cost and therefore price, and then also arrangements associated with the design of online courses. And what do these data points reveal about the extent to which online learning pre-pandemic is ready to scale up in the way that it's now being asked to do? So let's start with pricing. A question we've asked a number of times over the years through Chloe is, how do schools price online programs, and what does that tell us about the nature of those programs and how they're perceived? And this year, like prior years, the most common response, as you see here, the orange bar, is that schools charge the same price for an online program as a ground version of that program. And then you see we added some caveats, schools that say we generally charge the same, but there's a few exceptions. That adds to that ratio. So for the majority of institutions, the instinct is to price it the same, because as far as they're concerned, it's the same program, same faculty, same quality, same credential. We don't want to signal difference. But you can also see that there are exceptions to this pattern. There are institutions that charge less as a rule or in general for online programming. And there are also institutions that charge more than the campus equivalent for online programming. And obviously this slide only applies to schools that are multi-modality, not just wholly online. So as the title says, the pandemic will likely test these assumptions. We already know that some students who were happily studying on campus suddenly now have to study remotely, are questioning whether they should pay the same tuition. Their assumption is online is not what I signed up for. I don't get this, I don't get that. It's not as engaging, it's not what I want. It's too uneven. You need institution to somehow reduce tuition to address this tension. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So we also asked, well, why do schools either charge more or charge less? If they're not persuaded by this argument of parity at all costs, then why do they do things differently? So this shows you the rationale for schools that say, well, we actually tend to charge more for online than we do for on ground. And you can see the typical reasoning is not the alleged efficiencies of online learning. You see the word costs 5 times there. Higher third-party costs, higher marketing costs, higher program development costs, higher maintenance costs, higher delivery and support costs. And very few schools saying, well, you know, it's to do with pricing headroom or anything to do with efficiencies. They're saying the reason we charge more is because it costs us more to develop and deliver at a high standard. And we know that's been a debate in the literature over decades, and there's no right or wrong answer, but it tells us that for some schools, online learning is in no sense a more efficient delivery mode. It may actually be a less efficient delivery mode. And now online is being called to, in effect, run the entire US higher education system, at least temporarily. Is that cost burden going to be sustainable, or are schools suddenly going to have to find some efficiencies if we're going to achieve the scale that we need, but then might that come at the expense of quality? Let's go to the next slide. So here is the reverse perspective. Just back again. There we go, that one. So this is the perspective of schools that say, we charge less than on ground for online. Why do they do it? You see the most common reason is pricing constraints. This is often private nonprofit institutions that view online as a way of reaching new markets, appealing to new students, a way of getting out of what's often a very high list price for their programming in general on campus. So they say online is a way we can offer something different to the market and therefore charge a lower price point. Others say, well, we don't have campus related cost if everything's online, that makes sense. Others say, you know, it's all about trying to grow revenue related to the first point. And you see that some, but very few, cite lower costs. Remember on the previous slide, lots of schools say, well, we charge more because it costs us more. But a small proportion of our respondents say we charge less because it costs us less, not just the absence of campus-related services, but in our view, or their view rather, our third-party costs are lower, our program development costs are lower, we have lower delivery and support costs. We use this word online learning to cover this broad array of programming and courses, but in reality, there's very different cost models, development models, business models that are going on here that can lead to very different understandings of what it takes to do something well, and therefore what we need to charge to recoup our investment. So again, bear all this in mind as we go through here, thinking about what today online learning is being asked to do. Next slide. For the first time in Chloe 4, we asked chief online officers to characterize their understanding of the cost of their online courses and programs. Do they feel very confident about all those details? They know exactly the cost inputs and they know the total cost, or are they a little fuzzy? And you can see the sample as a whole, 25% of chief online officers said they had complete confidence in their understanding of online costs. 42% said they were fairly confident, 17 somewhat, 11 slightly, and 5% admitted they really didn't feel that they understood cost dynamics at all. Now, obviously, we have to remember that at many schools, online learning is a bottom-up activity. It's evolved over many years. Faculty often have a lot of autonomy to do things as they see fit. So the idea that there's some sort of top-down cost model that everyone adheres to is often far from the truth. At some schools, online is large scale, multiple programs, hundreds, if not thousands of courses. At others, it's one or two programs or a handful of courses. And obviously in the latter scenario, it's much easier to understand cost. But you see here, regardless of institutional scale online, small, under 1,000, mid-sized, up to 7,500, large, over 7,500, you see not dramatic differences. The larger you get, the more confident chief online officers are. But even at that large scale, you've got schools with a lot of scale, but not a lot of understanding because it's distributed and multifaceted and bottom up rather than top down. So the question is, will new pressure on institutions to run online learning at an unimagined scale at a time of revenue challenges, whether it's endowment performance in the stock market or donors holding back or state budgets cratering as tax revenues fall, tuition is going to become really, really important. And so is operational efficiency. So is this model of bottom up, multiple approaches, somewhat vague understanding of what things cost, often online actually costing more than on ground, how sustainable is that common arrangement for the foreseeable future? Next slide. So we did some cross-referencing here and asked about both chief online officers' understanding of online costs at their institution, but also how that understanding compared when it comes to the cost of campus-based learning. You know, what's our benchmark here exactly? And you can see here we've split respondents between those that say they have complete confidence in their understanding of online costs, those who have a fair confidence, and then those who have less confidence. And then amongst those groups, how does that understanding of online costs compare to their understanding of campus-based costs? So of the most confident, and this is ratios of the total sample. So 15% of the sample say they can have complete confidence in fully online costs, and that understanding is superior to their understanding of campus-based costs. And then 9% say it's about the same, and only 1% say that even though they have complete confidence online, they have even better confidence on ground. That's not the typical position. The most common is in that middle bar, and it's majority again saying, you know, either I think I understand online costs better than I do on ground, or saying it's about the same. And then the last row, not surprisingly, you see the typical response being either I don't understand cost at all, whatever the delivery mode, or my understanding of online is inferior to my understanding of on ground. So again, culturally, higher ed has not really been incented to track costs closely. We know higher ed is often characterized as an industry, if I can use that word, that is very human-centric, that is hard to scale up through clever use of technology. And online learning, for all its progress, is arguably still sort of debating that core question of how much can be automated in effect, and how much is still a matter of a human faculty member and human support staff dealing with instruction and support in real time with technology just as a supporting variable rather than somehow a transformatory one. And again, in this new environment, when online suddenly has to bear the burden of the entire system, at least for a while, is that going to shock online learning into maximizing efficiencies where they are possible, but equally making sure that that doesn't come at the expense of quality? Next slide. So then connecting this to another question we've asked over the years on the CLOE survey is, what's the primary or dominant online course development model at responding institutions? And our options remain the following. So our faculty essentially working independently. There's no support from specialists like instructional designers. Next option is, do faculty have the option of working with instructional designers, but it's not required? Then there is a requirement for those two to partner. The next is some sort of more multifaceted team approach, a variety of specialists, say assessment specialists or support specialists or media specialists, as well as instructional designers, plus faculty as subject matter experts. Do they all come together? Then, you know, we don't have a model at all. All of these things exist in pockets, and then a few, you know, additional variations. And you can see up top, the typical response is still, well, the most common response, not a majority, but the most common response is faculty have the option of working with instructional designers, but it's not required. About a quarter say faculty and IDs must partner. The team approach is pretty uncommon, and arguably faculty working entirely on their own is also pretty uncommon. So I'd see this as sort of work in progress. We're moving further and further away from faculty doing their own thing without support, which I think most people would accept is a good thing, but we're still a long way from the norm being a coordinated, consistent approach. And you can see some variety by institutional type, but essentially the patterns hold. Next slide. We then dug into, once again, well, what do we mean by online course? We throw this term around as if it was one thing. And acknowledging it's challenging to try and characterize tens, hundreds, thousands of online courses across multiple institutions through the views of one respondent, the Chief Online Officer, but nevertheless, it's interesting to get their perspective. So we ask, for the typical online course at your institution, what are students engaged with? And we ask proportion of time spent engaging with course materials, other students in the course, instructors, and then other staff. And you can see the typical response, these are averages, there's a lot of range behind these averages, but the typical response is about half the time is spent interacting with materials, about a fifth to a quarter with other students, about the same for instructors, and then minimal for other kinds of support staff. And strikingly, I think those ratios don't change much as an average, at least. whether you're looking at big schools, small schools, private, public, 2-year and 4-year. And today some people at least are very sensitive to this distinction between true online learning and remote instruction, the latter being the name given to the emergency move to virtual learning over the past few weeks. And I think this is a helpful window into the question of, well, what does quality look like? And can we start to think about these sorts of ratios? And the next slide, which is actually not from, was it this slide? Sorry, no, maybe it's the one after that. But anyway, this slide is sort of giving you a sense of the range in here. So it's showing you, say for materials, only 4% of respondents said that less than a fifth of student time was spent devoted to materials. 16% said that ratio was between 20 and 40%. 55% said it was at least 40%, up to 60%. And then 24% of schools said that the typical online student is spending at least 60% of their class time engaged with materials. And then you see other patterns as well, and much less variation on the other staff side. But there are some competency-based institutions that respond to Chloe where the role of sort of non-instructors in the conventional sense is central in the model. So there's a lot of range here, yes, but equally there's quite a lot of commonality. Next slide. So this was the slide I was referencing just now. This is from Chloe 3. We didn't repeat these questions, but we essentially saw the same trend, is that there's an interesting association, correlation. We don't know causation exactly, but there's an interesting pattern here where the more team-based and arguably thoughtful and coordinated the approach to online course design becomes at an institution, the more diverse the student engagement becomes. You see a reduced role for interaction with course materials and an increased role for interaction with other students, with faculty, and with other kinds of staff. And other things being equal, I would say that that experiential diversification, that pedagogic variety should mean a higher quality experience. And it's interesting that it does seem to be tied to a more team-based, thoughtful approach to design. And the question for schools, I think, at the moment is, to what extent does an emergency mean we've just got to get those courses up, and we can't be too sensitive to the kind of quality standards and processes we would normally require. But as time passes, if full online really becomes a thing, then do we really have to start thinking about coordinated design of online courses at scale? Is that feasible logistically? Is it feasible culturally? Equally, if we say no to those questions and we allow, a more sort of bottom-up approach, does that risk exacerbating student anxiety about online just not being what they signed up for, and all the potential negative implications of that in terms of lack of enrollment, attrition, and so forth? Question. So next slide. We also look for an association between the way that online courses are built and institutional pricing. Is there an association there? Are schools that take a very deliberate approach to online course design, are they in a better position to realize some efficiencies that, depending on your goal and your circumstance, might be quite useful if you're trying to keep costs down, keep prices down, remain competitive, and so on? And in today's environment, I think a school that has a leaner, more cost-effective approach to online course development and maintenance is probably better off than a school that has a model that, in their view, actually costs more than the campus equivalent. And we found an interesting association. You can see that for the green bar, schools that report generally charging less for online courses and programs are much more likely than average to say they have a team approach, and they're much more likely than average to say that they require faculty to work with instructional designers. So again, we can't say this is causation, but it's very interesting that there's an association between a more coordinated or team-based approach to design and more various pedagogy and student experience, but there's also an association between that approach to design and schools that find they can charge less for online programs than they do for campus-based programs. So as the title says, it appears that coherent and consistent design of online courses really drives cost understanding and therefore flexibility on price. Next slide. This is the last slide from me. So this isn't CLOE data. This is data from the federal IPEDS database, and it's the closest we have to an understanding of undergraduate online outcomes. Students who study more or less fully online, to what extent do they come out with a credential? And what I did was align those outcomes data to data in IPEDS that tells you how online a school is, from fully online schools all the way down to schools that offer no online programming at all. And the data is split out between full and part-time students, first-time students, meaning they've never enrolled before, and then non-first-time who've enrolled in the past, coming in with some credit. And it also distinguishes between Pell students and non-Pell students. And you can see all that variety here. And this is looking on an 8-year time frame to allow for slower completion for part-timers. What proportion by all these different categories emerge with some sort of credential, either a certificate, an associate, or a bachelor's. The data splits them all out, but just for simplicity's sake, just that aggregate. And then it divides schools into blue schools, those that are 90% or above online when it comes to undergraduates, schools that are at the opposite end of the spectrum, of up to 5% of their undergrads study online, and then the average for all schools. And in simple terms, you can see that as an average, there are exceptions to this at institutional level, but as an average, if an undergraduate is enrolled at a school that is fully or majority online, their chances of actually completing some sort of undergraduate credential within 8 years, and this is by necessity backwards looking data, this is the fall 2010 entry data closing fall 2018, so it is in the past. This may not look like the present, but for the years where this data exists, these are the kind of results that we see. So I say all that to say, how in today's environment, when suddenly everyone is online, how do we avoid these kinds of often poor outcomes? How do we break this association between fully online learning for undergrads, particularly more vulnerable undergrads, and often pretty lackluster outcomes? So that's the end of my section, and back to Ron.
Okay, well, one final question that we asked in the CLOE 4 survey was open-ended, and we asked for comments on this question and then tried to summarize the results, was about 5-year goals for online programs. And the Chief Online Officer's view of what the priority goals were. And analyzing the data, we were struck by some of the results. As we would have expected, increasing online enrollment and adding new online courses and programs were among the goals most frequently mentioned. But we did not fully appreciate that improved quality would be ranked as high as it was with the, in a word frequency type of analysis. It came out above even the two that I just mentioned. And remember, this was done back in the summer of 2019, before the current problems emerged. And when online experts could look forward to a future in which there would be continued growth of online learning, long-term trend, and what they could do to enhance the position of their institution. We took a closer look at the references to quality and found that there were different ways that people were using the term. About half were using it in a general sense, and they weren't really referencing one particular quality benchmark or another. Another almost 40% simply focused on course quality and their intent to improve course quality over the next 5 years. One got a sense that there have been rapid development. It was variable in quality, and now many of them are prepared to focus on bringing all online courses and programs up to an acceptable or quality standard. 13% actually mentioned meeting external quality standards. That is very dear to the QM community, and reassuring that between these three categories, there's ample room for growth of quality standards and the application of them. Some refer to quality in terms of the student learning experience, and then some seem concerned about the consistency across the online curriculum policies and practices, and that the next 5 years would be an attempt to achieve a greater degree of consistency, not just in the curriculum, but in the policies and practices of the institution. Well, I thought I would take a look at this, build a kind of scorecard for how these goals might be accomplished under the very different conditions that institutions are operating in the last several months. To improve online quality, for example, are we likely in the next year, the next 5 years, with the impact of the coronavirus, to see an overall improving of online quality? Or might we actually take a step back as we try to bring the entire faculty and student body into an online environment? Is this likely to improve overall program quality, course quality, meeting external quality standards? Perhaps if we could count on a vast influx, injection of new resources commensurate with the expanded role of online learning, that might be the case. But it seems far from that, as Richard is pointing out, with institutions actually looking forward to reductions in revenue over the near term. Are we likely to be improving the learning experience of students in online courses and programs, or achieving consistency across the curriculum? You can see these are my personal judgments. We did not ask our respondents to react to this. It was too soon to do that. Online enrollment increases, on the other hand, yes, perhaps in a dramatic way, but is this temporary or is it permanent? And adding online courses and programs, again, an emphatic yes, but what kind of quality can we expect if we're building hundreds and even thousands of courses per institution in such a short time frame? Looking ahead, the pandemic has really upended Chloe's plans for the next 5 years, or certainly for the next year. We had planned a survey of the online market this year. And we've shelved that plan temporarily because we don't believe that people can be expected to look that far ahead under the present circumstances, and that it's too early to say whether the impact of the pandemic is temporary or will lead to permanent changes in the relationship between online learning and higher education generally. And so our focus has shifted, at least for the time being, to online learning's readiness to assume the entire instructional burden. We are going to be following up within the next several weeks with a survey focused on the scale and scope of the challenge. And we're going to be reanalyzing our results from CLOE 1 through 4 on resources, relevant resources. And in midsummer, way ahead of the normal production schedule for our reports, but by midsummer of 2020, we hope to have a CLOE 5 report in your hands on the challenges ahead. That concludes our presentation. I see we've just about used our time. I hope you have entered your questions in the Q&A. And if some of you can stay with us for a few minutes longer, we can try to answer some of these, but we will try to get back to you with answers to all these questions. How ready are institutions for all learning to be online learning? Paradigm shifts are drastically occurring as we speak. Well, Todd's question is extremely relevant, and we've attempted a preliminary answer here. And I would say that you should look for our report in several months to give you a much more measured response to that question. But clearly, we are of the belief that this is a major challenge and one that can probably not be accomplished without considerable compromise in one direction or another. Mark asks, have we reached a point where most students are already very familiar with online learning and therefore required orientation is not necessary? I alluded to that being a rationale that some institutions are using. But I think many of you interested in this subject would know that many students still struggle with online learning despite the fact that their web surfing skills are fairly advanced. And that there are still struggles to achieve comparable graduation rates, as Richard's last bit of data pointed out. I think I'll have to break here because of time, but let me turn this over to Richard to see if he has some final comments and or wants to tackle one of these questions.
Well, as you say, Ron, I think we should perhaps call it there. There's been lots of great questions asked in the chat. We will, as always, pull those together, send back some responses. We appreciate your time and attention. We thank everyone who's completed past CLOE surveys, and we very much hope that you'll contribute to the next one, which we're working on now, and you'll see out in the field soon. And if you think you might not be on our list and you want to be, then just get in touch and we'll make sure we add you. So thanks again.
Ron, would you advance to the next slide? I just would like to thank the sponsors of the CLOE report, our platinum sponsor, iDesign, and our gold sponsors, Extension Engine and Instructional Connections. At this point, we can stop the recording. And for those of you who would like to take a screenshot, I believe we have a slide coming up if Ron will advance the slides that you can take